of George Floyd is to introduce today a man who needs no introduction but deserves one. Born October 3rd, 1954, Al Sharpton. Grew up like most of us, raised like most of us in church. His Sunday school teacher had no idea what she was teaching. His pastor had no idea who he was preaching to. His teachers had no idea who they were teaching. But since that time, he has become a social justice activist, a civil rights leader, a talk show host, a commentator, a leader of movements, a world changer, a freedom fighter, a preacher amongst preachers. When Officer Chauvin put his knee on the neck of George Floyd, he had no idea that the man whose life he was taking would be important enough to have this preacher to preach his eulogy. He probably thought it would end quietly in some obscure funeral home with a few people. But he had no idea that presidents of nations would think and write about him, and that the preacher who would preach the service would be the greatest civil rights preaching voice of our time. And we've talked much about how we change things, but when God wants to change things, he brings a person to the earth. And when this preacher was birthed, God knew there'd be moments like this where it would take someone's voice to speak truth to power prophetically that would change the world. And I hope that when we hear this preacher, all America understands that yes, we can change policies and legislation, but if we want to change this situation, white parents have to teach their boys to be brothers to black boys. We have to teach our daughters to be sisters, whether you're black, white, or brown. Because when George Floyd was gasping for breath saying, "I can't breathe," he was speaking the language of 400 years of Africans in this country. We couldn't breathe on the slave ships. We couldn't breathe in Jim Crow. We couldn't breathe through segregation. We couldn't breathe through mass incarceration. We couldn't breathe. There's been a preacher on the scene for the last 4 decades telling us Americans, we can't breathe. In Bensonhurst, we can't breathe. With Trayvon Martin in Sanford, we can't breathe. And this preacher is here today in Houston, Texas, because George Floyd died saying we can't breathe. I want you to welcome to this pulpit today the iconic preaching voice, anointed preaching personality of the Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton, our voice, our fighter, our leader, our freedom fighter. And because of him, guess what? One day all of us are going to breathe better. Let's stand and receive the Honorable Reverend Al Sharpton.
First to this family, the whole family that has suffered this crime. I hear people talk about what happened to George Floyd like there was something less than a crime. This was not just a tragedy. It was a crime. this family has borne this, and I'm going down to all of them that I'm giving. Because this is a time that we need to understand that they're going to do everything they can to delay these trials and delay the accountability and try to wear this family down. And many that are standing and coming today and skinning and grinning in front of cameras will not be here for the long run. We must commit to this family, all of these family, all 5 of his children, grandchildren and all, that until these people paid for what they did, that we're going to be there with them, because lives like George will not matter until somebody pays the cost for taking their lives. We cannot just act like this is some new way of teaching sociology. We can't act like this is some new need for some of us to add social justice to our programs on Sunday morning. There is an intentional neglect to make people pay for taking our lives. If 4 blacks had done to 1 white, if 4 black cops had done to 1 white what was done to George, they wouldn't have to teach no new lessons. They wouldn't have to get corporations to get money. They would send them to jail. And until we know the price for black life is the same as the price for white life, we're going to keep coming back to these situations over and over again. Either the law will work or it won't work. So I want to give honor to the family and a commitment that we're going to be here for the long haul. When the last TV truck is gone, we'll still be here. I've gotten to know some of the family over the last few days. I've seen them cry in private. I've seen them talk. I told them I grew up in a black family. I know we always don't get along. I got some cousins watching me now that better never call me. That's what families are. But I've also seen them in light moments. I'll never forget last week when the family part that was there talked with former President Obama on the phone and said, we're not asking you to come because it'll take all the Secret Service stuff and all that, but we just want to thank you and your wife for calling our name of our brother, our uncle, during the speeches you've been making. And the president made the mistake of asking, well, what is it y'all want me to do? Just tell me where I could be helpful. And Philonis said, well, 2 things. We want justice. And we in Minneapolis, can you send me some food down here? Because they only had the finger food. Everything was closed up in Minneapolis. He said, I ain't on Reverend Al's diet. I want some food. So we had some light moments. I want to also say, give honor to Reverend Dr. Remus Wright and Reverend Mia Wright. For opening the doors of this church and putting their arms around Sabrina and her family at this hour. They know this is going to be controversial in some circles, yet they opened the doors anyway, not knowing what would happen, not knowing how people would behave. And as I spoke with him on the phone and he welcomed his family, I think we are giving them a lot of, we should not take them for granted. And I think that they are deserving of a lot of honor. He's a man and she's a woman of courage. We have too many holy punks in the pulpit.